Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a deeply historical view of an event you've definitely heard about, but maybe haven't fully unpacked. We're going to zoom way out and look at Pearl Harbor not just as a devastating day of battle, but really as the explosive catalyst that forged the very framework of our modern world. We're going to see exactly how a single morning permanently rewired global power dynamics.
Here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll start with the collision course, move into planning the preemptive strike, and then detail the day of infamy. After that, we'll cover the flaws in intelligence failures, look at the immediate global fallout, and finally finish up with forging the modern world.
Section 1. The collision course, the 1930s geopolitical pressure cooker. Okay, let's dive into this. To understand how we got there, we have to step back into the late 1930s. You see, the attack on Pearl Harbor didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was the boiling point of a simmering geopolitical pressure cooker. Imperial Japan was already engaged in a brutal war of expansion. They had invaded Manchuria in 1931 and launched a full-scale war against China by 1937.
To really get the stakes here, we have to look at Japan's endgame. They called it the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Now, while that was framed as this cooperative economic bloc, it was actually just the ideological cover for a massive, expansive Japanese imperial empire. They were looking to conquer and control the vast resources of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and that put them on an absolute, inevitable collision course with Western powers.
So, the United States was officially neutral at this time, right? But they were actively working to constrain Japan's ambitions. The U.S. froze Japanese assets and sent support to nationalist China. But the absolute breaking point? That was the 1940 to 1941 embargo on oil, steel, and iron. To put that into perspective, Japan imported 80% of its oil from America. 80%! Without it, their military machine would literally grind to a halt. When the U.S. delivered the Hall Note on November 26th, demanding Japan withdraw from China entirely, well, Japan's military leadership concluded war was simply unavoidable. To secure Southeast Asia's resources, they believed they had to neutralize the American naval threat first.
Moving on to Section 2, planning the preemptive strike, the architecture of attack. To actually neutralize the U.S. Pacific Fleet, Japan needed a plan of truly unprecedented audacity.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the sheer paradox of the man behind the attack, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He actually opposed the war. He was Harvard-educated, had served as a naval attaché right in Washington, and intimately understood American industrial might. He famously warned that Japan could only run wild for 6 months to a year. And yet, as the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, he became the brilliant architect who designed the devastating preemptive strike he hoped would force the U.S. into negotiations.
Pulling this off required some absolutely massive tactical innovations. Yamamoto drew his inspiration from the 1940 British carrier attack on Taranto. He assembled the Kido Butai, a massive, mobile strike force of 6 aircraft carriers, and they maintained absolute radio silence while creeping across the North Pacific. But the real engineering marvel was the weaponry. You see, Pearl Harbor was incredibly shallow, only about 40 feet deep. Standard torpedoes would just drop, hit the mud, and be useless. So the Japanese specially modified aerial torpedoes with wooden fins to run shallow, and they practiced relentlessly in Kagoshima Bay, which perfectly mimicked Pearl Harbor's topography.
Section 3. The Day of Infamy, December 7th, 1941. All of that macro strategy and preparation brings us down to the micro level. Let's walk through exactly how this specific morning unfolded.
The morning unfolded through a really tragic series of missed warnings. At 3:42 a.m., a U.S. minesweeper actually spots a Japanese midget submarine. At 6:53 a.m., a destroyer even sinks one, but the report gets delayed. Then, at 7:02 a.m., Private Joseph Locker detects a massive radar blip, but it's dismissed by a duty officer as a flight of friendly B-17 bombers arriving from the mainland. Because of these missed signals, when the first wave of 183 aircraft strikes at 7:48 a.m., Commander Mitsuo Fuchida is able to radio Tora, 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 indicating total devastating surprise has been achieved. The terror lasts until the second wave finally departs at 9:55 a.m.
In those terrifying hours, the human cost was just unimaginable. Just sit with this number for a second. 1,177. That is the number of crewmen who died aboard a single ship, the battleship USS Arizona. A modified armor-piercing bomb ignited her forward ammunition magazine, and the ship exploded and sank in just 9 minutes. This single vessel accounted for nearly half of all American deaths that day.
and 2,403. That's the total number of Americans killed on December 7th, which includes 68 civilians. An additional 1,178 were wounded. The physical destruction was staggering too. 8 American battleships were damaged or sunk, and 188 aircraft were destroyed, mostly caught just sitting directly on the runway.
Section 4. Flaws and intelligence failures. A strategically incomplete victory. Let's move to and see how this builds into the broader strategic picture of the war. Because honestly, despite the overwhelming tactical devastation we just saw, history views the Japanese attack as a massive strategic failure.
Here is exactly why the attack ultimately fell short. First, and most importantly, the 3 U.S. aircraft carriers, the Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, were out at sea. They were not in port. As you'll see, this completely altered modern naval warfare. Second, the Japanese totally ignored the fuel tanks and repair facilities. If those had been destroyed, the U.S. fleet would have been forced to retreat all the way back to the West Coast. And finally, Vice Admiral Nagamo actually canceled the planned third wave to protect his carriers. It was a decision Yamamoto later recognized as a critical mistake.
So you might be wondering, how in the world was the U.S. caught so off guard? Well, there's a persistent conspiracy theory that President Roosevelt knew about the attack and just let it happen to bring the U.S. into the war. But the historical consensus firmly rejects this. The reality? It was institutional dysfunction. The U.S.'s magic cryptography program had actually decoded diplomatic traffic showing war was imminent, but the specific target was completely unknown. The November 27th war warning pointed commanders toward the Philippines and Malaya. Add in poor Army-Navy coordination over radar and a really tragic underestimation of Japanese military capability due to racial arrogance, and you have a recipe for disaster, not a deliberate sacrifice.
Section 5. The immediate global fallout. America awakens. We're now going to zoom back out to the global stage. This attack instantly triggered political shockwaves that basically rearranged the map of the world.
Literally overnight, years of fierce American isolationist debate just vanished. On December 8th, FDR delivered his famous Day of Infamy speech, and Congress declared war with only a single dissenting vote. By December 11th, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S., plunging America simultaneously into both the European and Pacific theaters. But we also have to recognize that this domestic awakening had a very dark, tragic consequence at home. Driven by wartime panic and prejudice, the U.S. government forced approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans into internment camps under Executive Order 9066. It remains one of the most shameful civil liberties violations in American history.
Section 6. Forging the Modern World. The Long-Term Legacy. As we enter our final act here, we really need to look at how the fires of December 7th forged the long-term legacy of the modern world we live in today.
And this brilliantly illustrates a massive shift. Think about it. December 6th was the era of the battleship, slow, heavily armored surface fleets dictating global power. But because the U.S. battleships were sunk and the carriers survived, December 8th forcibly birthed the naval air power era. Almost overnight, fast, long-range carrier strike groups became the dominant force of the oceans, and they completely reshaped military strategy forever.
The historical ripple effects of this single day are absolutely colossal. I mean, Pearl Harbor transformed the United States from a reluctant, isolationist nation straight into an engaged global superpower. The brutal logic of the Pacific War that followed led directly to the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, initiating the nuclear age. Plus, the massive intelligence failures of December 7th directly shaped U.S. foreign policy and led to the creation of the CIA in 1947, alongside the establishment of the massive, permanent peacetime military presence that the U.S. maintains to this very day.
The memory of that day is still very physically present. If you visit the USS Arizona Memorial in Hawaii today, you can literally still see it leaking oil into the harbor, droplets that are known as black tears. Yet, time also brings healing. In 2016, President Barack Obama and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe stood together at that very memorial. It was a deeply powerful symbol of reconciliation, proving that even the fiercest of enemies can forge an enduring alliance. Which leaves us with this final thought. When you look at the globe today, at the intelligence agencies, the carrier strike groups, the alliances, and the structures of international power, you're looking at a world that was directly molded by the events of December 7, 1941. So ask yourself, how does the geopolitical legacy of Pearl Harbor continue to shape our world today? Because the history isn't just in the past, it is the foundation of our present. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.